Montana Territory, 1878. The copper light of dusk bled across the jagged horizon as Lydia Harrington stared at her reflection in the cracked mirror. At 23, she had long since resigned herself to spinsterhood. Her honey-blonde hair hung in loose waves past her shoulders, framing a face considered pretty by most standards, high cheekbones, full lips, and eyes the color of summer sage. But beauty meant little on the frontier, where survival trumped sentiment and practicality outweighed passion. She adjusted the simple blue calico dress that hung from her slender frame, smoothing wrinkles that spoke of a day's hard work at the mercantile. 4 years in Timber Creek had taught her that the wilderness was a place where dreams went to die, especially foolish dreams of romance. Men wanted wives who could cook, clean, bear children, and never complain, not someone like her, educated and opinionated, with notions of equality that made most frontier men uncomfortable. "Lydia, the delivery's here," her father's voice carried up the narrow staircase of their modest home attached to the mercantile. "Coming, Papa," she called back, pinning up her hair quickly. She descended the stairs, each creaking step a reminder of how firmly rooted she had become in this remote outpost. The mercantile had been her father's dream, a fresh start after her mother's death when Lydia was just 16. They had left Boston's comforts for the rugged promise of the West, where Harold Harrington believed a man could reinvent himself. What neither had anticipated was how the frontier would reinvent Lydia. The bell above the door jangled as she entered the store. Her father, a man worn thin by grief and hard work, was signing for a shipment while a tall figure stood with his back to her, hat in hand. "Ah, there she is," her father said. "Lydia, this is Mr. Ingram, the new ranch hand at Holloway's place. He'll be handling their accounts with us now." The man turned and Lydia felt an unexpected jolt. Most cowboys who passed through were weathered by sun and hardship, their eyes dulled by the brutal reality of frontier life. But this one was different. Perhaps 25, with dark hair that curled slightly at the nape of his neck, and eyes that reminded her of clear mountain springs. His face was clean-shaven save for the lightest shadow of stubble along his jaw, giving him a youthful appearance that contrasted with his broad shoulders and the quiet confidence in his stance. "Miss Harrington," he said, voice deeper than she expected, with a gentle drawl that suggested Texas origins. "Nathan Ingram, pleased to make your acquaintance." As she extended her hand, Lydia reminded herself of the truth she had accepted years ago. No man would ever truly see her. Not her mind, not her heart, not her dreams. They might see a potential bride, a domestic convenience, but never her authentic self. Love, real love, the kind she'd read about in novels smuggled from back east, had no place on the frontier. "Mr. Ingram," she replied coolly, withdrawing her hand quickly when the warmth of his touch lingered longer than propriety dictated. "Welcome to Timber Creek." She turned away, busying herself with inventory sheets and pretending not to notice how his gaze followed her movements. Lydia had long ago learned that the best protection against disappointment was to expect nothing, especially from men passing through a town as small and forgotten as theirs. What she couldn't know was that Nathan Ingram had not come to Timber Creek by chance, and his arrival would soon shatter every belief she held about her future in the wild, unforgiving West. The following week brought unseasonably heavy rain, turning Timber Creek's main street into a river of mud. Lydia stood at the mercantile's front window, watching sheets of water cascade from the awning. The store was empty save for her father, who dozed in his chair by the pot-bellied stove, his ledger open but forgotten in his lap. The emptiness gave Lydia time to think, a dangerous luxury. Her 24th birthday approached, marking another year of the same routine, ordering supplies, keeping books, helping customers, and reading alone by lamplight. The letters from her Boston friend Rebecca described a life so different: social gatherings, intellectual discussions, courtships that weren't merely transactions of convenience. The bell above the door jangled, startling her from her thoughts. Nathan Ingram stood in the doorway, rain dripping from his duster and hat. He removed both, hanging them on the rack with careful precision. "Miss Harrington," he said, nodding politely, "quite the deluge we're having." "Indeed," she replied, noticing how the rain had darkened patches of his blue cotton shirt. "What can I help you with today, Mr. Ingram?" "Mr. Holloway needs additional supplies." He handed her a list, "and I was hoping you might have a copy of Emerson's essays." The request surprised her. Most cowboys asked for tobacco, ammunition, or at most, a newspaper. "Emerson?" she echoed, unable to mask her curiosity. A slight smile lifted the corner of his mouth. "A man can appreciate both horses and philosophy, can he not?" "Of course," she said quickly, embarrassed by her transparent surprise. It's just that most men who come through here aren't exactly interested in transcendentalist thought. Perhaps you haven't been meeting the right men, he replied, those clear eyes studying her with an intensity that made her uncomfortable. Her father stirred in his chair, saving her from responding, "Ah, Mr. Ingram, back so soon." While her father and Nathan discussed ranch matters, Lydia retreated to the back room where she kept her small, precious collection of books. Her fingers trailed over the spine of her personal copy of Emerson, a parting gift from her literature teacher in Boston. She hesitated, then pulled it from the shelf. This wasn't a mercantile item, it was hers. But something compelled her to share it. When she returned, her father had retreated to his office, leaving her alone with Nathan. "I don't have one for sale," she said, extending the worn volume. "But you're welcome to borrow mine if you'd like." Nathan took the book with careful hands, as if understanding its value to her. "I wouldn't want to deprive you." "I've read it many times," she interrupted. "Besides, there aren't many Emerson enthusiasts in Timber Creek. It would be nice to know someone else appreciates him." His fingers brushed hers as he accepted the book, and that same inexplicable jolt returned. "Thank you, Miss Harrington. I'll take good care of it." "See that you do," she said, more sharply than intended. "And please call me Lydia." "Lydia," he repeated, her name sounding different in his voice, almost like a melody. "Then you must call me Nathan." She nodded, suddenly aware of how quiet the store had become, how the rain drummed a steady rhythm on the roof, and how his presence seemed to fill the space in a way no customer ever had before. "Why Timber Creek?" she asked impulsively. "Cowboys usually drift through, not settle, especially educated ones." Something flickered across his face, caution perhaps, or memory. Sometimes a man needs roots. The drifting life loses its appeal after a while. "And Holloway's ranch offered roots," she pressed, sensing there was more to his story. "Among other things," he said vaguely, "Mr. Holloway is a fair employer." And Timber Creek seemed like a town with potential. Before she could inquire further, the door opened again, admitting Sheriff Dawson and two bedraggled travelers, a woman clutching a small child to her chest. "Lydia," the sheriff said urgently, "these folks need help." Their wagon overturned at Foster's Crossing, lost everything in the river. Lydia immediately set aside her curiosity about Nathan, focusing instead on the immediate crisis. The woman was shivering violently, her child whimpering against her neck. "Bring them to the back room," she directed, already moving to heat water and gather blankets. To her surprise, Nathan moved with her, shedding his vest and rolling up his sleeves. "What can I do to help?" Over the next hour, Lydia learned more about Nathan Ingram through actions than words. He carried water, built up the fire, and fashioned a makeshift bed from empty grain sacks and blankets. He spoke softly to the frightened child, a boy of about 4, and produced a small wooden horse from his pocket as a distraction. "You're good with children," Lydia observed as they stepped outside the storeroom to give the mother privacy to change into dry clothes. Nathan shrugged, a shadow crossing his features. "My sister had young ones before." He didn't finish, and Lydia didn't press. The West was full of unfinished stories, lives interrupted by disease, violence, or the merciless elements. "Will they stay in town?" he asked instead. For now, they were heading to Oregon, but, she gestured helplessly. "Starting over with nothing and a child seems impossible." "Nothing's impossible with help," Nathan said quietly. "The West may be harsh, but its people need not be." The simple statement lingered in Lydia's mind long after Nathan had left, taking her Emerson and leaving behind questions she couldn't articulate. She had constructed a careful belief about frontier life, that it was a place of isolation where one survived through self-reliance and lowered expectations. But watching Nathan's gentle handling of the stranded family had sparked an uncomfortable thought. What if her belief wasn't wisdom but fear? What if connection was possible even here, especially here, where life's fragility made human bonds all the more precious? She pushed the thought away. One kind cowboy didn't change the nature of the frontier. And men like Nathan Ingram didn't stay in places like Timber Creek. They drifted on, like tumbleweeds caught in the wind, leaving nothing but dust and disappointment in their wake. 2 weeks passed, and Lydia found herself watching the door more often than she would admit. Nathan had not returned her book, nor had he appeared for the regular Holloway Ranch supply run. His absence shouldn't have mattered. He was just another customer, after all. but she found herself inventing reasons to visit the sheriff's office, the post, anywhere she might casually encounter information about the Holloway ranch. "You seem distracted," her father commented one evening as they closed the store. "Is something troubling you?" "Just thinking about the Weaver woman and her boy," Lydia lied. The stranded travelers had found temporary lodging with the preacher's family, while the town collected donations to help them restart their journey. Her father nodded, accepting the explanation. "Speaking of which, there's a town meeting tomorrow about organizing a barn raising at the Holloway place. Apparently they're expanding. More hands coming on, need more housing." Lydia's heart quickened. "Will you go?" "Candle. The supply wagon from Helena is due, but someone should represent us," he said meaningfully. "The mercantile benefits from a prosperous ranch." "I'll go," she offered too quickly. "For business purposes." Her father's eyes twinkled knowingly, but he said nothing more. The next morning, Lydia took unusual care with her appearance, choosing her best day dress, a forest green that complemented her eyes, and arranging her honey blonde hair in a style more elaborate than her usual practical bun. She told herself it was merely appropriate to look presentable at a town meeting. The gathering was held in the small town hall, which doubled as a church on Sundays. Nearly every business owner and prominent citizen was present, along with several ranch hands from neighboring properties. Lydia scanned the room, trying not to appear obvious in her search. "Looking for someone?" asked a familiar voice behind her. She turned to find Nathan, hat in hand, standing closer than propriety dictated. The surprise of his sudden appearance made her honest. "Actually, yes, you still have my book." His lips quirked into a half-smile. "I finished it 3 days ago, rode out to return it yesterday, but you were closed." "Wednesday afternoons," she explained. "Papa takes inventory, and I visit the school to read to the children." Something warm flashed in his eyes. "You read to them." "Stories mostly, some poetry when they'll tolerate it," she said. "Books were my window to the world when I was young. I like offering the same to them." Before he could respond, Bernard Holloway, owner of the Double H Ranch and Nathan's employer, called the meeting to order. A barrel-chested man with a gray-streaked beard, Holloway had built the largest cattle operation in the county through grit and shrewd business sense. "As most of you know," Holloway began, "we've secured the Army contract for beef supply to Fort Benton. This means expansion, more cattle, more hands, more buildings. We're planning a barn raising next Saturday and would appreciate any help Timber Creek can offer." The discussion turned to logistics, materials needed, food for workers, scheduling. Throughout, Lydia was acutely aware of Nathan standing at the edge of the gathering, his attention seemingly focused on Holloway but occasionally drifting to her. When the formal meeting concluded, people broke into smaller conversations. Lydia found herself approached by Mrs. Holloway, a kindly woman with shrewd eyes that missed nothing. "Miss Harrington, how lovely to see you," she said warmly. "I was hoping to persuade you to help coordinate the women's contributions for the meal at the barn raising." "Of course," Lydia agreed. "The mercantile will donate coffee and sugar as well." "Wonderful, perhaps you could ride out Friday to help with preparations. We have plenty of room for you to stay overnight." The invitation was unexpected but welcome. Lydia rarely left town, and the prospect of a night away from the mercantile was appealing. "I'd be delighted if my father can spare me." "Excellent, Nathan can escort you, Mrs. Holloway said with a glance toward her ranch hand that suggested matchmaking intentions. Lydia felt warmth creep into her cheeks. "That's not necessary." "I insist," the older woman said firmly. "The road can be dangerous for a young woman alone, what with the Blackfoot River gang still at large." The mention of the notorious outlaws who had been terrorizing the territory for months silenced Lydia's objections. 3 stagecoach robberies and a ranch raid had been attributed to them, with rumors of worse deeds whispered in saloons. "Very well," she conceded. "Thank you for your consideration." After Mrs. Holloway moved on, Lydia found herself alone with Nathan once more. "It seems we'll be riding together on Friday," he said, his expression unreadable. "So it seems," she replied, struggling to maintain her composure. "Though I wouldn't want to inconvenience you." "No inconvenience," he assured her. "I have business in town that morning anyway. I'll call for you at noon if that suits." "That would be fine," she hesitated, then added, "and my book." "Ah, yes." He reached into his saddlebag, which he'd brought into the meeting, and produced her volume of Emerson. "Thank you for lending it. I especially appreciated his thoughts on self-reliance. Lydia took the book, noting that he had taken excellent care of it. And what did you make of his argument that to be great is to be misunderstood? A shadow passed over his face. I think Emerson had the luxury of being misunderstood in civilized company. Out here, being misunderstood can get a man killed. The comment struck her as odd, revealing a wariness she hadn't noticed before. You speak as someone with experience in being misunderstood. Nathan's gaze turned distant. Everyone has parts of themselves others don't see, Lydia, sometimes by choice, sometimes by necessity. The cryptic response only deepened her curiosity. Before she could press further, Sheriff Dawson approached, his usually genial face serious. Ingram, he said with a nod, Miss Harrington. Sheriff Nathan replied, tension evident in his posture. Any news on the Blackfoot River gang? Nothing concrete, but there's talk they're moving north from Helena, just warning folks to stay vigilant. The sheriff's gaze lingered on Nathan. Especially those riding between properties. Appreciated, Nathan said stiffly. An uncomfortable silence fell, broken only when the sheriff tipped his hat to Lydia and moved on. The sheriff seems to take a particular interest in you, Lydia observed. Nathan's jaw tightened. Dawson takes an interest in all newcomers, it's his job. And are you merely a newcomer, Nathan? She asked, sensing there was more beneath the surface of his carefully constructed persona. For a moment she thought he might confide in her. Something flickered in his eyes, vulnerability perhaps, or conflict. But then the moment passed and his expression closed once more. Just a cowboy looking for steady work, he said lightly. Nothing more mysterious than that. Lydia knew a deflection when she heard one. In Boston, such evasiveness might have been merely intriguing, but in the West, secrets could be dangerous, could even be deadly. As she walked home that evening, Emerson tucked safely in her satchel, Lydia confronted an uncomfortable truth. Nathan Ingram intrigued her in ways no man ever had before. His education, his gentleness with the stranded child, the shadows that crossed his face when his past was mentioned, all created a puzzle she longed to solve. But 4 years on the frontier had taught her caution. Men with secrets rarely brought anything but trouble, and trouble was the last thing she needed in her carefully ordered life. Still, as she prepared for bed that night, Lydia found herself anticipating Friday with a mixture of excitement and apprehension she hadn't felt in years. One afternoon in Nathan Ingram's company wouldn't change anything, she told herself firmly. She was too practical, too grounded in reality, to be swept away by a handsome cowboy with a mysterious past and an appreciation for transcendentalist philosophy. The frontier had no place for romantic notions, and neither did she. At least that's what she kept telling herself. Friday dawned clear and cool, a perfect late spring day in the Montana Territory. Lydia rose earlier than necessary, packing her small carpetbag with deliberate care, a night dress, fresh clothing for the barn raising, her brush and toiletries. She hesitated, then added the volume of poetry she was currently reading. If the evening at the ranch proved dull, at least she would have literature for company. Her father watched her preparations with poorly concealed amusement. It's one night at the Holloways, not a grand tour of Europe, he teased over breakfast. I simply want to be prepared, she replied primly, ignoring his knowing smile. Prepared for what exactly, or perhaps I should ask for whom? Lydia shot him a warning look. Papa, please, this is a business arrangement, nothing more. The mercantile benefits from good relations with the Holloway Ranch. Of course, he said, raising his hands in mock surrender. Though I must say Nathan Ingram seems a fine young man, educated too, from what I gather. Many men seem fine at first glance, she countered, busying herself with clearing the breakfast dishes. The frontier has a way of revealing true character over time. Her father's expression softened. Not all men are like James Wheeler, Lydia. The name sent an unwelcome pang through her chest. James had been the first and only man in Timber Creek to court her seriously, a handsome freighter who had wooed her with poetry and promises, only to disappear after a passionate declaration of love, never to return. She had later learned he had a wife in Bozeman. This has nothing to do with James, she said firmly. I simply have no illusions about romance on the frontier. Men want practical wives, not. Whatever it is, I am. And what are you? Her father asked gently. Lydia paused, considering. Too educated for my own good, according to Mrs. Peterson. Too opinionated for a woman, according to most men in Timber Creek. Too Eastern for the West, too Western for the East now, she shrugged, aiming for nonchalance but achieving something closer to resignation. I don't fit, Papa, I've accepted that. Harold Harrington regarded his daughter with a mixture of pride and concern. You fit perfectly well exactly as you are, and someday you'll meet someone who sees that. Perhaps, she allowed, unwilling to argue, but until then I have the mercantile, my books, and you. That's enough. Her father looked unconvinced but let the matter drop. Will you be taking Juniper? He asked, referring to her sturdy bay mare. Yes, Nathan, Mr. Ingram will escort me, but I'll need my own mount. At precisely noon, the bell above the mercantile door announced Nathan's arrival. He entered with a quiet confidence, dressed in clean work clothes with his dark hair damp from a recent washing. The subtle scent of soap and leather accompanied him. Miss Harrington, he greeted her, hat in hand. Are you ready to depart? Nearly, she replied, fighting an unexpected flutter of nerves, just securing the ledger for my father. While she completed her tasks, she was acutely aware of Nathan conversing easily with her father about cattle prices and the weather. There was something disarming about his manner, respectful but not obsequious, knowledgeable without being boastful. He spoke to her father as an equal, something few young men managed. Finally ready, Lydia collected her carpetbag and riding gloves. Shall we? Nathan took the bag from her hands despite her protest that she could manage. Outside, 2 horses waited, his tall chestnut gelding and a spotted pony laden with supplies. I thought we might stop at Foster's Crossing, Nathan explained as he secured her bag to his saddle. Mrs. Holloway asked if we could gather some wildflowers for the tables tomorrow. That sounds lovely, Lydia agreed, surprised by the thoughtful detour. He helped her mount Juniper with a light touch that was both proper and attentive. As they rode out of town, Lydia was conscious of curious gazes from townspeople, particularly from Harriet Wilson, the telegraph operator and Timber Creek's most prolific gossip. By evening, everyone would know that Lydia Harrington had ridden out alone with the handsome new ranch hand. Let them talk, she thought with uncharacteristic defiance. There was nothing improper about an escorted journey to assist with a community event. The 7-mile ride to the Holloway Ranch took them through rolling grassland punctuated by stands of pine and aspen. Spring had transformed the landscape, painting it with the vibrant greens of new growth and the rainbow hues of wildflowers. After the initial awkwardness faded, conversation flowed more easily than Lydia had expected. How did you come to be in Timber Creek? Nathan asked as they rode side by side. You don't strike me as someone born to frontier life. Is it that obvious? She laughed. I was born and raised in Boston. My father brought me here after my mother died. He had a cousin in Helena who wrote about opportunities in the territory. Do you miss the East? Lydia considered the question carefully. I miss certain aspects, libraries, theater, conversations about something other than cattle prices and weather predictions. She paused, then added honestly, but there's a freedom here I never knew in Boston. Despite its dangers and hardships, the West allows reinvention in a way the East never could. Reinvention, Nathan repeated thoughtfully. Yes, I suppose that's one way to see it. And you, she asked. Your accent suggests Texas, but you quote Emerson like a Harvard man. A smile touched his lips. Not Harvard. My father was a schoolteacher in San Antonio. He believed education was the only true path to freedom, especially for those born without advantages. Was, she queried gently, noting his use of the past tense. Nathan's expression clouded. He died during the war. Confederate conscription officers came for my older brother. My father intervened. They shot him on our porch as an example to others who might interfere with recruitment. The blunt revelation stunned Lydia. Nathan, I'm so sorry. He shrugged, but the casual gesture couldn't disguise the old pain in his eyes. It was a long time ago. I was 15. Old enough to understand the cost of principles in a world that values expediency. And your brother, taken anyway, died at Vicksburg, his jaw tightened. My mother followed less than a year later. Grief, the doctor said, though I think it was more a deliberate fading away. She simply stopped fighting to live. Lydia's heart ached for the boy he had been, losing his entire family in such quick succession. So you were alone at 16. Not entirely. I had my sister until 5 years ago. She married a rancher in East Texas. They had 2 children. A shadow crossed his face. Influenza took them all in a single week while I was away on a cattle drive. So much loss, Lydia murmured, understanding now the shadows she sometimes glimpsed behind his eyes. They rode in silence for a time, the rhythmic sound of hoofbeats punctuated by meadowlarks calling from the grass. Lydia found herself studying Nathan's profile, the strong line of his jaw, the slight furrow between his brows that spoke of habitual thoughtfulness. "What about you?" he asked eventually, steering the conversation away from his past. "You mentioned your mother's passing brought you west, but you've shared little else." Lydia hesitated. Her story seemed pale compared to his tragedies. "There's little to tell. My mother died of pneumonia when I was 16. My father, unable to bear the memories in Boston, decided we needed a fresh start. He sold his interest in an import business and brought me to Montana. We've been in Timber Creek for 4 years now. And in those 4 years, have you found happiness here?" The directness of the question caught her off guard. "Happiness is a luxury on the frontier," she replied automatically, then winced at how cynical she sounded. "I've found purpose, at least. The mercantile serves a vital function. The community has accepted us." "That's not what I asked," Nathan said gently. Their eyes met, and Lydia felt suddenly exposed, as if he could see past her carefully constructed practicality to the loneliness beneath. "Happiness requires expectations," she said finally. "I've learned it's safer not to expect too much from life out here." Nathan studied her with an intensity that made her uncomfortable. "Someone hurt you," he observed quietly. She looked away. It was nothing dramatic, simply a lesson in frontier realities. Before he could press further, they crested a small rise, and Foster's Crossing came into view, a shallow ford where the creek widened, its banks carpeted with wildflowers in vivid blues, yellows, and purples. "It's beautiful," Lydia breathed, grateful for the distraction. Nathan dismounted and came to help her from her horse. His hands were strong and sure at her waist, lingering perhaps a moment longer than necessary. The proximity sent a disconcerting warmth through her. "Mrs. Holloway specifically requested lupin and Indian paintbrush," he said, releasing her. "There seems to be plenty of both." They spent the next hour gathering flowers, working mostly in companionable silence. Lydia found herself stealing glances at Nathan as he moved with unexpected grace for such a tall man, carefully selecting the best blooms and arranging them with surprising artistry. "You have a good eye for composition," she noted as they prepared to leave, the saddlebags now filled with wrapped bouquets. "My mother loved flowers," he explained simply. "She taught me to notice beauty in small things." As they remounted and continued their journey, Lydia felt something shift between them. A tentative bridge forming across the careful distance she maintained with everyone in Timber Creek. Nathan's willingness to share his past, his attentiveness without expectation, his genuine interest in her thoughts, all were unfamiliar and disarming. They were within a mile of the Holloway ranch when the sound of rapidly approaching horses reached them. Nathan tensed immediately, his hand moving to the revolver at his hip. "Get behind me," he ordered, all warmth vanishing from his voice. "What is it?" Lydia asked, alarmed by his sudden change. "Riders coming fast." "Could be nothing, but—" He didn't finish the thought. 3 mounted men appeared around a bend in the trail, riding hard. Even at a distance, Lydia could see that they were rough-looking, unshaven, with bandanas pulled up over their faces. "Trouble?" Nathan muttered. "When I say run, you ride for the ranch as fast as Juniper can carry you. Don't look back." Fear gripped Lydia's chest. "Nathan, no. These are likely Blackfoot River men. They don't leave witnesses, Lydia." His eyes met hers, fierce and determined. "Promise me you'll ride." Before she could respond, the lead rider spotted them and shouted something to his companions. They spread out, clearly intending to cut off any escape. "Now, Lydia," Nathan yelled, drawing his revolver and firing a warning shot over the approaching riders' heads. Instinct took over. Lydia dug her heels into Juniper's sides, urging the mare into a gallop toward the distant ranch buildings. Behind her, she heard more gunshots and men shouting. Terrified but determined, she bent low over Juniper's neck, pushing the horse to her limits. The sound of another horse gaining on her sent panic surging through her veins. She risked a glance back to see one of the riders in pursuit, the other 2 apparently engaged with Nathan. The pursuing man was gaining, his mount fresher and faster than Juniper. A gunshot cracked the air, and Lydia felt something burn across her upper arm. She cried out, nearly losing her grip on the reins. Juniper, spooked by the noise and the smell of blood, veered sharply, nearly unseating her. The ranch buildings were visible now, perhaps half a mile distant. If she could just stay mounted, someone might hear the gunfire and come to their aid. But her arm was burning, her vision blurring at the edges, and the rider behind her was closing the distance rapidly. Another shot rang out, this one from a different direction. Her pursuer cursed loudly. Lydia glanced back to see Nathan galloping toward them, his face a mask of fury and determination. He fired again, and the outlaw's horse stumbled, throwing its rider hard to the ground. "Keep riding," Nathan shouted as he drew alongside her. Blood streaked his left temple, but his eyes were clear and focused. Together they raced for the ranch, the remaining outlaws falling behind as ranch hands, alerted by the gunfire, came riding out to meet them. By the time they reached the safety of the Holloway property, Lydia was lightheaded from blood loss and shock. She swayed in the saddle, darkness creeping in at the edges of her vision. The last thing she remembered was Nathan's arms catching her as she fell, his voice urgent in her ear, "Stay with me, Lydia. Stay with me." Then darkness claimed her completely. Lydia awoke to the soft glow of lamplight and the scent of clean linens. For a disorienting moment, she couldn't place where she was or why her arm throbbed with dull pain. Then memory returned in a rush, the wildflowers, the ambush, Nathan's fierce protection, the burning across her arm. "There you are," came a gentle female voice. "Welcome back, dear."
Mrs.
Holloway sat beside the bed, her kind face lined with concern. "How are you feeling?" Lydia tried to sit up and winced as pain shot through her left arm. "A bit dazed," she admitted. "How long was I unconscious?" "Just a couple of hours. The bullet only grazed you, thank the Lord, but you lost some blood and the shock took its toll." Mrs. Holloway helped her to a sitting position, adjusting pillows behind her back. "Dr. Mills says you'll be right as rain in a week or so." Memory of the attack sharpened. "Nathan, is he all right?" Something knowing flickered in Mrs. Holloway's eyes. "Mr. Ingram is fine. A cut on his head and some bruises, nothing more serious. He's been pacing outside that door for the past hour, wearing a track in my good hallway rug." Heat rose in Lydia's cheeks. "He saved my life." "So we heard." "Took on 3 of the Blackfoot River gang single-handed." Mrs. Holloway's expression grew somber. "Sheriff Dawson is here. They captured one of the outlaws, the one Nathan shot off his horse. He's anxious to speak with both of you when you're feeling up to it." "Of course," Lydia agreed, though the prospect of reliving the attack was daunting. "First, though, there's someone who's been mighty worried about you." Mrs. Holloway stood and opened the bedroom door, saying something too quiet for Lydia to hear. A moment later, Nathan entered, his tall frame seeming too large for the feminine guest room. A white bandage covered his left temple, and a darkening bruise marked his jawline. His eyes, however, were what caught and held Lydia's attention, the naked relief in them when he saw her conscious and sitting up. "You're awake," he said simply, remaining near the door as if uncertain of his welcome. "Mrs." Holloway discreetly slipped out, closing the door partway behind her, enough for propriety but allowing them a measure of privacy. "Thanks to you," Lydia replied. "Mrs. Holloway says you faced 3 outlaws alone." Nathan moved closer, taking the chair Mrs. Holloway had vacated. "2, really. The 3rd was chasing you." His jaw tightened. "I should never have let them separate us." "If anything had happened to you." "But it didn't," she interrupted gently. "You came for me." Something vulnerable flashed across his face. "I'll always come for you, Lydia." The simple declaration hung in the air between them, far more intimate than any flowery profession of admiration. Lydia felt suddenly breathless, unmoored from the practical certainties that had governed her life for years. Before she could formulate a response, a knock at the door heralded Sheriff Dawson's arrival. The lawman entered, hat in hand, his weathered face grim. "Miss Harrington, good to see you awake. How are you feeling?" "Well enough, Sheriff, thank you." Dawson nodded, then got straight to business. "I need to ask you both about what happened today. The man we captured is Jake Harding, a known member of the Blackfoot River gang. He's not talking yet, but we're holding him in the ranch storehouse until we can transport him to the jail in town." For the next 20 minutes, Lydia and Nathan recounted the ambush in detail. Dawson listened intently, occasionally asking clarifying questions. When they finished, his expression was troubled. "This marks the first time they've directly attacked travelers rather than robbing stagecoaches or isolated homesteads," he said. "It's a worrying escalation." "Do you think they were after anything specific?" Nathan asked, his voice carefully neutral. The sheriff's gaze sharpened. "Hard to say. Miss Harrington, was there anything valuable in your baggage?" "Just clothing and personal items," she replied. "Nothing worth stealing." Dawson nodded, then turned to Nathan. You handled yourself remarkably well against 3 armed men, Mr. Ingram, almost like you've had experience with such situations. Nathan met the sheriff's gaze steadily. I've ridden with trail herds through Indian territory and bandit country. Any cowboy who survives long enough learns to shoot straight and think fast. I suppose so. Dawson didn't sound entirely convinced. Still, taking on the Blackfoot River gang isn't the same as scaring off cattle thieves. You're lucky to be alive, both of you. After a few more questions, the sheriff prepared to leave. At the door he paused. One more thing, Mr. Ingram. The prisoner mentioned something odd when we were bringing him in. Said he's the one they're looking for. Any idea what he might have meant by that? Lydia saw Nathan's shoulders tense almost imperceptibly. None, he replied evenly. Sounds like the ramblings of a wounded man. Dawson studied him for a long moment. Perhaps. Well, I'll be taking him to town at first light. Mr. Holloway has men posted as guards tonight, so you should both rest easy. He tipped his hat. Miss Harrington, glad to see you recovering well. After the sheriff departed, a heavy silence fell between them. Lydia watched Nathan, noting the careful neutrality of his expression that hadn't been there before Dawson's final question. He's the one they're looking for, she repeated quietly. Nathan, what did he mean? For a moment she thought he might continue the pretense of ignorance, then something seemed to give way within him. He leaned forward, elbows on knees, hands clasped tightly together. I haven't been entirely truthful with you, Lydia, he said, voice low, about why I came to Timber Creek. Her heart sank. Despite her growing feelings for him, she had known, hadn't she, that there was more to Nathan Ingram than a cowboy seeking steady work. Tell me, she said, steeling herself for disappointment. Nathan met her gaze directly. I was a Texas Ranger for 3 years after the war. Last year I was part of a task force tracking a gang that had robbed banks in 4 states. We finally cornered them near the New Mexico border. He paused, the memory clearly painful. There was a shootout. 3 of my fellow Rangers died. I killed 2 of the gang, but their leader escaped, a man named Silas Reed. Lydia's breath caught. Silas Reed was a name she knew. Everyone in the territory did. He was rumored to be the leader of the Blackfoot River gang. Reed swore vengeance, Nathan continued, put a bounty on my head. I resigned my commission and headed north, hoping to disappear. I've been moving from place to place, staying ahead of his men. His expression darkened. I thought I'd lost them. I was wrong. And today wasn't random, Lydia realized. They knew who you were. They were hunting you. Nathan nodded grimly, and they nearly killed you because of it. Self-recrimination filled his voice. I should never have allowed myself to become close to anyone here. I've put you in danger. You couldn't have known they'd find you, she argued, but I should have been more careful. He stood abruptly, pacing the small room. I told myself I was staying in Timber Creek because it was remote, because the Holloways were good employers. The truth is, I stayed because of you, Lydia. The admission hung in the air between them, startling in its directness. Me, she echoed, scarcely believing what she'd heard. Nathan stopped pacing, his expression softening as he looked at her. From the moment I walked into your mercantile, I was drawn to you. Your intelligence, your quiet strength, the way you've adapted to frontier life without losing your essential self. He shook his head ruefully. I told myself I was just being friendly, that I could keep a proper distance. But today, when I saw that outlaw chasing you, when I heard the gunshot. He didn't finish, but he didn't need to. The raw emotion in his voice told Lydia everything his words didn't. What will you do now? She asked, her practical nature asserting itself despite the turmoil of emotions his confession had unleashed. The safest thing would be to leave, he said, the words clearly painful. Draw Reed's men away from Timber Creek, away from you. And go where? Keep running forever, she shook her head. That's not a life, Nathan. It's better than risking yours. He moved to the window, staring out at the gathering dusk. Reed won't stop. As long as I'm here, everyone around me is in danger. Lydia considered his words, weighing them against what she knew of frontier justice and the limited reach of the law in the territories. An idea began to form. What if, she said slowly, instead of running from Reed, we used what happened today to draw him out? Nathan turned, brows furrowed. What do you mean? You said Reed put a bounty on your head. That means he's sending others to do his dirty work while he stays safely hidden. She sat straighter, warming to her plan. But if word spread that one of his men was captured while trying to kill a former Texas Ranger, that the prisoner was talking. Reed might come himself to silence him, Nathan finished, understanding dawning. It's too risky, Lydia. These aren't ordinary criminals, they're killers. So is Sheriff Dawson when protecting his town, she countered. So are the Holloway Ranch hands when defending their home, so are you when necessary. She held his gaze steadily. The frontier demands hard choices, Nathan. You can run forever, always looking over your shoulder, or you can make a stand with people who will stand with you. The surprise on his face told her he hadn't expected such fierce pragmatism from her. You make it sound so simple. Not simple necessary, she softened her tone. I don't want you to leave, Nathan, not when I've just found you. Something in his expression shifted, hope warring with fear, longing with responsibility. He moved back to her bedside, taking her hand in his. Lydia Harrington, he said quietly, you are unlike any woman I've ever known. Before she could respond, a commotion erupted outside, shouting, the pounding of hooves, a single gunshot. Nathan was on his feet instantly, drawing his revolver. Stay here, he ordered, moving swiftly to the door, but Lydia was already pushing back the covers, ignoring the pain in her arm. If it's Reed's men, then you'll be safer here, he insisted. More shouting came from the direction of the storehouse where Jake Harding was being held. Nathan hesitated, clearly torn between staying to protect her and investigating the disturbance. Go, Lydia urged him. I'll bar the door behind you. With a last, lingering look, Nathan slipped out of the room. Lydia quickly moved to secure the door, then retrieved her carpetbag from beside the bed. From its depth, she extracted the small Derringer pistol her father had insisted she carry on her travels. It held only 2 shots, but they might make the difference if Reed's men breached the house. Through the window, she could see figures moving in the yard, illuminated by lanterns and the fading twilight. The Holloway Ranch hands appeared to be exchanging gunfire with attackers positioned near the tree line. As she watched, Nathan sprinted across the open space toward the storehouse, keeping low. Lydia's heart pounded with fear for him, but also with a strange, fierce pride. This was the man he truly was, brave, decisive, protective, a former lawman who had tried to escape his past but was now facing it head-on. A man she was falling in love with, despite every practical reservation she'd built around her heart. The realization struck her with stunning clarity. In the midst of danger and uncertainty, one truth emerged undeniable. Nathan Ingram had awakened something in her that she had thought long buried, hope. Hope that connection was possible even in this harsh land. Hope that she might be truly seen and valued for exactly who she was. The distant crack of gunfire pulled her from her thoughts. The battle outside was intensifying. Lydia gripped her small pistol tighter, praying that Nathan would return safely, that this night would not end in tragedy. She had found something worth fighting for. Now she had to trust that they would both survive to explore what that might mean. Dawn broke over the Holloway Ranch, painting the sky in streaks of crimson and gold that seemed too beautiful for the aftermath of violence. Lydia stood on the front porch, a blanket wrapped around her shoulders despite the mild morning air. She had not slept, none of them had, after the night's events. Reed's men had come in force, 8 riders intent on freeing Jake Harding and, it seemed, settling scores with Nathan. They hadn't expected the ranch to be so well defended, with Holloway's hands supplemented by neighboring ranchers who had arrived for the barn raising. The attackers had been repelled, but not without cost. 1 ranch hand dead, 3 others wounded, including Bernard Holloway himself, shot in the shoulder while defending the storehouse. And Nathan. Lydia's gaze sought him across the yard, where he stood in quiet conversation with Sheriff Dawson and 2 deputies who had arrived from town just after the attack ended. He looked exhausted, his shirt stained with blood, some his own from a reopened head wound, some from the man whose life he had saved when the storehouse was breached. That man was Jake Harding, the captured outlaw, who now sat handcuffed in a wagon bound for the Timber Creek jail. He had been wounded in the attack, shot by his own compatriots, who had apparently been more interested in silencing him than freeing him. Facing his own mortality, Harding had begun talking, confirming what they had already suspected. Silas Reed had personally ordered the hit on Nathan Ingram. He's a remarkable man, came Mrs. Holloway's voice as she joined Lydia on the porch, offering a steaming cup of coffee. Mr. Ingram, I means. Lydia accepted the cup gratefully. Yes, he is. The older woman studied her with kind but shrewd eyes. He cares for you deeply, you know. I've never seen him look at anyone the way he looks at you. Heat rose in Lydia's cheeks. We've known each other only a short time. Time means little on the frontier, Mrs. Holloway said with the wisdom of her years. Life is too uncertain, too precious to waste in lengthy courtships. Bernard and I knew within a week that we were meant for each other. That was 32 years ago. She smiled softly at the memory. When you find someone willing to face gunfire for you, my dear, it's worth taking notice. Before Lydia could respond, the men across the yard broke up their conference. Nathan headed toward the porch, his expression solemn but determined. Sheriff Dawson and his deputies moved toward the wagon containing Harding, preparing to depart. Ladies, Nathan greeted them, removing his hat. Despite his exhaustion, he managed a small smile for Lydia. How are you feeling this morning? Better than you look, she replied, earning a chuckle from Mrs. Holloway. I'll leave you two to talk, the older woman said tactfully, retreating into the house. Once they were alone, Nathan's smile faded. Dawson's taking Harding to town. He's agreed to testify against Reed in exchange for leniency. Will that be enough to capture Reed? Lydia asked. Perhaps, Nathan hesitated. Harding says Reed has been operating from a hideout near the Idaho border. Dawson's organizing a posse to go after him. Understanding dawned. And you're going with them? It wasn't a question, but Nathan nodded anyway. I have to, Lydia. This ends only when Reed is captured or killed. As long as he's free, you're in danger. Everyone connected to me is in danger. Lydia wanted to argue, to beg him not to go, to insist there must be another way. But she understood duty and responsibility too well to voice those pleas. When do you leave? She asked instead, fighting to keep her voice steady. Tomorrow at first light. He stepped closer, close enough that she could see the fatigue etched in the fine lines around his eyes. Lydia, I need to say something before I go. Last night in your room, we were interrupted before I could tell you. Miss Harrington, Sheriff Dawson called from the yard. Could you join us for a moment? I need your statement about yesterday's attack before we head to town. Nathan's jaw tightened in frustration at the interruption. We'll continue this conversation later, he promised quietly, but later proved elusive. The day was consumed with preparations for the posse, for tending the wounded, for securing the ranch against any further attacks. The barn raising was postponed, but many of the neighbors stayed to help with repairs and to strengthen defenses. Lydia found herself constantly occupied, assisting Mrs. Holloway with meal preparation and caring for the wounded. By evening, exhaustion had overtaken her. Her injured arm throbbed dully, and the emotional strain of the past 2 days weighed heavily. She retired to the guest room early, intending only to rest briefly before supper. Instead, she fell into a deep sleep almost instantly. She awoke hours later to darkness and silence. The house was still, the only sound the distant hooting of an owl. Lydia lit the bedside lamp and was surprised to find a folded paper on the small table beside it, her name written in a firm, masculine hand. With trembling fingers, she opened the notes. Lydia. I came to speak with you, but you were sleeping so peacefully I hadn't the heart to wake you. By the time you read this, I will likely be gone. Dawson received word that Reed and his remaining men were spotted heading north. We ride tonight rather than wait for morning. There is so much I wish to say to you, but perhaps it's better this way. Cleaner. If something happens to me, you'll be spared deeper grief. If I return, well, then I can say what needs saying to your face as a man should. Know this, meeting you has been the one bright light in a dark journey. Whatever happens, carry that truth with you. Yours, Nathan. Lydia reread the note twice, emotion tightening her throat. The practical part of her understood his reasoning. A midnight departure might give them the advantage of surprise against Reed. But another part, the part that had been awakening since Nathan entered her life, felt a keen sense of loss at being denied a proper farewell. Sleep now impossible, she dressed quickly and made her way downstairs. The house was silent, the Holloways and their guests long asleep. Through the front window, she could see the ranch yard bathed in moonlight, empty save for a few horses in the corral. On impulse, she stepped outside onto the porch. The night air carried the scent of pine and sage, cool but not unpleasant. She wrapped her shawl tighter around her shoulders and settled into a rocking chair, Nathan's letter clutched in her hand. How quickly everything had changed. Just days ago, she had been content with her quiet life, convinced that romance and connection were luxuries not meant for her. Now, she found herself praying for the safe return of a man she barely knew, yet somehow understood at the deepest level. Couldn't sleep. The voice startled her from her thoughts. She turned to find Nathan himself standing at the edge of the porch, still fully dressed, his gun belt strapped to his waist. I thought you were gone, she said, rising quickly. Your note. We leave within the hour, he explained, moving closer. The men are making final preparations. I was just checking the perimeter one last time. In the soft moonlight, his features seemed both sharper and more vulnerable. Without thinking, Lydia closed the distance between them, reaching out to touch his arm as if to reassure herself he was really there. I'm glad you haven't left yet, she said softly. I wouldn't have wanted your note to be our goodbye. Nathan's hand covered hers where it rested on his arm. I'm not good at goodbyes, Lydia, never have been. Then don't say goodbye, she suggested, summoning courage from some untapped reserve. Say you'll come back to me. Something shifted in his expression, surprise giving way to a fierce, tender determination. Is that what you want, for me to come back to you? Yes, she admitted, the single word carrying the weight of all her carefully dismantled defenses. I know it's fast, perhaps even foolish. We've known each other such a short time, but Nathan didn't let her finish. In one fluid motion, he drew her to him, one hand cradling her face with exquisite gentleness. Not foolish, he murmured, not to me. And then he was kissing her, a kiss that began tentatively but quickly deepened into something that made Lydia's knees weak and her heart race. His arms encircled her, careful of her injured arm but secure enough to make her feel safer than she had ever felt in her life. When they finally broke apart, both breathless, Nathan rested his forehead against hers. I've wanted to do that since the moment I saw you in your father's store, he confessed. Why didn't you? She asked, her fingers tracing the line of his jaw. Because I knew if I kissed you once, I'd never want to stop. His voice roughened. And a man on the run has no right to make promises he might not be able to keep. Lydia pulled back slightly to look into his eyes. But you're not running anymore. You're facing Reid, ending this. Yes, his expression grew solemn, but Lydia, you need to understand this is dangerous. Reid is no common outlaw. He's cunning, ruthless, and he has men loyal to him scattered across 3 territories. I understand, she assured him. I've lived on the frontier long enough to know its dangers. What I don't understand is why you think that should stop. Whatever is happening between us. Nathan studied her face as if memorizing every detail. You deserve certainty, stability, not a man with enemies and a violent past. What I deserve, she said firmly, is to choose for myself what risks are worth taking. She placed her hand over his heart, feeling its strong, steady beat. And you, Nathan Ingram, are worth the risk. For a moment he seemed at a loss for words, overcome by her declaration. Then he pulled her close again, his kiss more urgent this time, filled with promise and longing and the bittersweet knowledge of impending separation. Nathan, a voice called from the barn, we're ready to ride. They broke apart reluctantly. Nathan cupped her face in his hands, his gaze intense. I will come back to you, Lydia Harrington. That's a promise I intend to keep. I'll hold you to it, she whispered. He kissed her once more, briefly but tenderly, then stepped back, his hand lingering on hers until the last possible moment. Wait for me. I will. She watched him walk away, his tall figure soon swallowed by the darkness. Only when the sound of hoofbeats had faded into the distance did she allow herself to acknowledge the fear that gripped her heart. The posse was riding into danger, facing men with nothing to lose. And the man she had so unexpectedly come to love was at the center of it all. The next 8 days were among the longest of Lydia's life. She returned to Timber Creek the morning after the posse's departure, escorted by 2 of Holloway's ranch hands. Her father, having heard about the attack, was beside himself with relief at her safe return, though concerned about her injury. I should never have let you go alone, he fretted, examining her bandaged arm. I wasn't alone, Papa, she reminded him, and Nathan saved my life. Something in her tone must have revealed more than she intended, for her father's expression shifted from concern to thoughtful assessment. This Nathan Ingram means something to you, doesn't he? Lydia considered deflecting or minimizing, but found she no longer wanted to hide her feelings. Yes, she admitted, he does. To her surprise, her father smiled. Good. He strikes me as a fine man, educated, respectful, capable. He's also a former Texas Ranger hunting a dangerous outlaw, she added, wanting her father to understand the full situation. Harold Harrington's eyebrows rose. Is that so? Well, that explains Sheriff Dawson's interest in him. He considered this new information. A lawman then, that's honorable work. Former lawman, Lydia corrected, and there's no guarantee he'll return. The posse is facing considerable danger. Her father's expression softened. My dear girl, there are no guarantees in this life, especially on the frontier. But a man willing to face his past and protect others, that's a man worth waiting for. His easy acceptance was both a relief and a surprise. Lydia had expected questions, concerns, perhaps even opposition to her developing relationship with Nathan. Instead, her father seemed almost pleased. "You're not worried?" she asked. "About you caring for a good man?" He shook his head. "No, about the danger he faces. Yes, but that's the reality of our lives here." He took her hands in his. "Lydia, I've watched you close yourself off since that scoundrel Wheeler broke your heart. You've been going through the motions of living without truly engaging with life. If Nathan Ingram has awakened your heart again, I can only be grateful to him for that." Tears pricked at Lydia's eyes. "Oh, Papa. When did you become so wise about matters of the heart?" He smiled sadly. "I loved your mother deeply for 20 years. I know what real connection looks like and what it's worth." The days that followed settled into an uneasy pattern. Lydia resumed her duties at the mercantile, her injured arm healing gradually. But her thoughts remained with the posse, wondering where they were, whether they had found Reed, if Nathan was safe. News traveled slowly on the frontier. The telegraph lines reached only as far as the county seat, 40 miles distant. Occasional travelers brought rumors. The posse had tracked Reed to a mining camp near the Idaho border. There had been a shootout. Men had died, but nothing concrete, nothing reliable. On the 6th day, a letter arrived from Mrs. Holloway, carried by a ranch hand making a supply run. "Dear Lydia, I hope this finds you recovering well from your ordeal. Bernard's shoulder is mending nicely, though he complains constantly about being confined to the house. We received word yesterday from Sheriff Dawson. The posse located Reed's hideout in an abandoned mining camp. There was significant resistance. 2 deputies were wounded and one of Reed's men was killed. Reed himself escaped with several followers and the posse has continued pursuit into the mountains. The sheriff specifically mentioned that Mr. Ingram was unharmed and instrumental in tracking Reed's movements. Bernard says that with Nathan's skills, they stand a good chance of capturing Reed, though the mountain terrain is challenging. I will send word if we receive any further news. Please know that you are in my thoughts and prayers, dear. I recognize the look that passed between you and Mr. Ingram that night on my porch. Some connections are unmistakable, even in their early stages. With fondest regards, Martha Holloway." The letter brought both relief and renewed anxiety. Nathan was alive and unharmed, or had been when the sheriff sent his message. But Reed was still free, the pursuit continuing into increasingly dangerous territory. On the 8th day, Lydia was alone in the mercantile, her father having gone to help the blacksmith with a delivery of iron goods. The afternoon was quiet, with few customers braving the unseasonable heat. She was inventorying a shipment of canned goods when the bell above the door jangled. "Be right with you," she called without looking up from her ledger. "No rush," came a familiar voice that stopped her heart. "I've waited this long." "I can wait a moment more." Lydia's head snapped up. Nathan stood just inside the door, hat in hand, looking travel-worn and exhausted but gloriously, wonderfully alive. A healing cut marked his cheekbone, and his clothes were trail-dusty, but his eyes, those clear, honest eyes, were fixed on her with an intensity that stole her breath. "Nathan," she whispered, the ledger forgotten as she moved toward him. He met her halfway, gathering her into his arms with a gentleness that belied his obvious need to hold her. For a long moment they simply clung to each other, his face buried in her hair, her hands gripping the back of his shirt as if afraid he might disappear. "You came back," she finally said, pulling away just enough to see his face. "I promised I would." His thumb traced the curve of her cheek, though it was a near thing a time or two. "Reed?" she asked, almost afraid of the answer. "Dead," Nathan said simply. "He refused to surrender. Forced our hand." Lydia studied his expression, seeing the complexity of emotions there, relief certainly, but also a sort of somber regret. "Are you all right?" He understood what she was really asking. "I never took pleasure in killing, Lydia, not even someone like Reed, but he chose his path right to the end." His expression lightened slightly. "The important thing is that it's over. His gang is scattered or captured. The bounty on my head died with him." "So you're free," she said, the full implications sinking in. "Free to what?" Nathan's hands moved to frame her face, his gaze steady and sure. "Free to build a life. Here if that's what you want." Here, she echoed, hardly daring to believe what he seemed to be suggesting. Sheriff Dawson offered me a deputy position, he explained. Said Timber Creek could use a man with my experience, especially with the territory growing. It would mean staying, putting down roots. His voice softened. It would mean seeing you every day if you'd allow it. Joy bubbled up inside her, but caution tempered it. Nathan, are you certain? A week ago you were ready to leave, convinced your presence put me in danger. A week ago Reed was alive and hunting me, he pointed out. But you were right about something important, Lydia. Running isn't living. His thumb stroked her cheekbones gently. I've been running for so long I'd forgotten what it means to belong somewhere to someone. And now, she whispered, her heart pounding. Now I want to belong to you, he said simply. I know it's fast, I know we have much to learn about each other still, but I've never been more certain of anything in my life. Lydia searched his face, finding nothing but sincerity in his expression. All her careful defenses, all her practical reservations about romance on the frontier seemed suddenly insignificant compared to the truth shining in his eyes. I want that too, she admitted, her voice steady despite the emotions threatening to overwhelm her. I want to see where this leads, Nathan. I want to know everything about you. I want. The bell above the door interrupted her, announcing the arrival of a customer. Nathan reluctantly released her, stepping back to a respectable distance. Mrs. Peterson, Lydia greeted the minister's wife, struggling to compose herself. How can I help you today? The older woman's shrewd gaze moved between Lydia and Nathan, clearly noting their proximity and Lydia's flushed cheeks. I can come back later, dear, if you're occupied. Not at all, Lydia assured her, though she ached to continue her conversation with Nathan. Mr. Ingram was just informing me of the posse's success. Indeed, Mrs. Peterson's expression brightened with interest. We'd heard rumors, but nothing certain. The Blackfoot River gang has been dealt with then. Yes, ma'am, Nathan confirmed. Reed is dead and his men captured or scattered. Well, that is good news indeed. The minister's wife beamed. We must spread the word. Perhaps the town should organize some sort of celebration, a gathering to thank the brave men who restored safety to our region. Lydia could see Nathan's discomfort at the suggestion of public recognition. I'm sure Sheriff Dawson would appreciate your thoughts on the matter, Mrs. Peterson, she said diplomatically. Now, what can I help you find today? While Lydia assisted Mrs. Peterson with her purchases, a process deliberately prolonged by the older woman's obvious curiosity about Nathan, he browsed the store, occasionally catching Lydia's eye with a private smile that made her heart flutter. By the time Mrs. Peterson finally departed, laden with packages and buzzing with news to share, the afternoon was waning. Lydia turned the sign in the window to closed and locked the door, unwilling to risk further interruptions. Now, she said, turning to Nathan with determination, where were we? His slow smile warmed her from within. I believe I was about to ask if I might court you properly, Miss Harrington. Court me, she repeated, moving closer to him. That sounds very formal for a man who's already kissed me rather thoroughly on Mrs. Holloway's porch. A blush actually crept up his neck at her boldness. I want to do right by you, Lydia. Your father, the town. My father already approves of you, she interrupted. And as for the town, well, they'll talk regardless of what we do. That's the nature of small communities. Still, he insisted, taking her hands in his, I want us to start on the right foundation. No secrets, no running, no shadows between us. His expression grew serious. I care for you too deeply to rush this and risk ruining it. Lydia was touched by his concern, his determination to honor her in the eyes of the community. It spoke to the kind of man he truly was, honorable, thoughtful, respectful of the social fabric that held frontier towns together. Very well, she agreed, squeezing his hands. You may court me, Nathan Ingram. Though I warn you, I'm already quite thoroughly partial to you. His smile was like sunrise breaking over the mountains. That makes two of us then. He drew her closer, one hand moving to the small of her back while the other gently tilted her chin upward. May I, he murmured, his gaze dropping to her lips. Please, she whispered. This kiss was different from their desperate embraces on the Holloway ranch, slower, deeper, filled with promise rather than fear of separation. Lydia melted into it, her arms winding around his neck as she allowed herself to fully embrace the joy of being in his arms, safe and certain. When they finally parted, both slightly breathless, Nathan pressed his forehead to hers. "I've been waiting for you," he whispered, the words so quiet she almost didn't hear them. "My whole life, I think, without even knowing it." "I've been waiting for you, Lydia." Something clicked into place within her heart, a sense of recognition, of coming home after a long journey. This man, with his quiet strength and gentle soul, his courage and his scars, saw her completely and wanted her exactly as she was. "I'm here," she promised him, "and I'm not going anywhere." Outside the mercantile window, Timber Creek continued its daily rhythms. Wagons passing, children playing, the life of the frontier unfolding in all its harshness and beauty. But inside, in the circle of Nathan's arms, Lydia had found something she had stopped believing in. A love strong enough to withstand the challenges of the West, and a future bright with possibilities neither of them had dared to imagine alone. Autumn 1878. Golden light filtered through the church windows, casting a warm glow over the gathered townsfolk. Timber Creek's small wooden chapel was filled to capacity, with latecomers standing in the back and children seated cross-legged in the aisles. Word had spread quickly after the formal announcement, and it seemed the entire county had turned out to witness the event. In the front pew, Harold Harrington dabbed discreetly at his eyes with a handkerchief. Beside him sat Martha and Bernard Holloway, the latter's arm still in a sling from the wound sustained during the outlaw attack 3 months prior. At the altar, Nathan Ingram stood tall and straight in a new black suit, his dark hair neatly trimmed, his face clean-shaven save for a carefully groomed mustache he had grown at Lydia's admiring suggestion. The silver deputy's badge pinned to his lapel caught the light, a symbol of his new role in the community. The church doors opened, and the assembled crowd rose as one. Nathan's breath caught in his throat as Lydia appeared in the doorway on her father's arm. She wore a gown of ivory silk, ordered specially from Helena, simple in design but elegant in its clean lines and exquisite fabric. Her honey-blonde hair was partially swept up, with soft curls framing her face and trailing down her back, adorned with tiny white flowers. But it was her expression that truly took Nathan's breath away, the radiant joy in her eyes as they found his across the crowded church, the slight curve of her lips in a smile meant only for him. As she moved slowly down the aisle, the months since their first meeting passed through Nathan's mind like the pages of a cherished book. Their courtship conducted properly, but with an undercurrent of passion that had occasionally tested both their restraint. The gradual integration of Nathan into Timber Creek's tight-knit community, the moment he had formally asked Harold for permission to marry his daughter. That conversation had been easier than Nathan expected, with Harold offering not just his blessing but also a partnership in the mercantile. "The business has grown beyond what I can manage alone," Lydia's father had explained. "And with the railroad spur coming next year, we'll need to expand. You have a good head for numbers, son, and Lydia trusts you." "That's enough for me." The offer had solved the one practical concern in their plans. Nathan had saved carefully during his ranger years, but a deputy's salary alone would have made for a modest start to married life. The partnership meant security, a future they could build together. Now, as Lydia reached the altar and her father placed her hand in his, Nathan felt a sense of rightness, of completion, that he had never experienced before. "Who gives this woman in marriage?" the minister asked, following the traditional service. "I do," Harold replied, his voice thick with emotion. He kissed Lydia's cheek, then stepped back to take his seat. The ceremony proceeded with the time-honored words that had joined couples for generations. But when the time came for their vows, Nathan and Lydia had chosen to add their own promises to the traditional ones. "Lydia," Nathan began, his voice steady despite the emotion evident in his eyes, "before you, I was a man running from his past, afraid to build a future. You gave me the courage to stop running, to face what haunted me, to believe I deserved more than survival." He took both her hands in his. "I promise to love you completely, to protect you fiercely, to honor your independence while offering you my strength. I promise to build with you a home filled with books and ideas, with respect and passion, with the family we will create together. I have been waiting for you my entire life, and I will spend the rest of it showing you what a gift your love is to me." Tears glistened in Lydia's eyes, but her voice remained clear as she spoke her own vows. "Nathan, I once believed that love was a luxury the frontier couldn't afford, that connection meant only vulnerability in a harsh land. You taught me that true strength lies in opening your heart, not guarding it. In you I found not just a protector or provider, but a partner who sees me completely and loves what he sees." She squeezed his hands gently. "I promise to stand beside you in all seasons, to create with you a home that is a haven, to raise with you children who know both courage and compassion." I promise to love you when the days are easy and when they demand all we have to give. You are the answer to a question my heart had stopped asking, and I will cherish you all the days of my life. Not a dry eye remained in the church as they exchanged rings, simple gold bands that symbolized promises without beginning or end. When the minister finally pronounced them husband and wife, Nathan drew Lydia to him with exquisite tenderness, sealing their union with a kiss that balanced proper restraint with unmistakable devotion. The celebration that followed at the Holloway Ranch was the most festive event Timber Creek had seen in years. Tables groaned with food contributed by every household, musicians played lively tunes for dancing, and children darted between groups of adults in impromptu games. As dusk fell, lanterns were lit, casting a magical glow over the gathering. During a quiet moment, Nathan and Lydia slipped away to the same porch where they had shared their first kiss the night he rode out with the posse. The autumn air carried a hint of crispness, and the stars were beginning to appear in the darkening sky. "Happy Mrs. Ingram?" Nathan asked, drawing her into the circle of his arms. Lydia smiled at the sound of her new name. "Completely, Mr. Ingram." He brushed a strand of hair from her face, his expression growing serious. "I meant every word today, Lydia. You saved me in ways you may never fully understand. And you showed me that the frontier didn't have to mean isolation," she replied, tracing the line of his jaw with her fingertips. "That connection was possible even here, especially here. Your father mentioned that the rooms above the mercantile might feel cramped once we start a family," Nathan said, a hint of mischief in his eyes. "He suggested we might consider building our own place on that parcel of land just east of town." Lydia's eyes widened. "The meadow by Willow Creek, but that's the prettiest piece of land for miles." "So I told him," Nathan agreed. "And he said that's precisely why he purchased it last month, as a wedding gift for us." "Oh, Nathan," tears sprang to her eyes. "A home of our own, with space for a garden, room for children to play. And a library," he added, knowing exactly what would please her most. "A proper room filled with books, with comfortable chairs where we can read together in the evenings." The vision he painted filled her heart with such joy she could scarcely contain it. From the distant yard came the sounds of their celebration, laughter, music, the community that had embraced them both. "When I first came to Timber Creek," Lydia said softly, "I thought I was accepting a smaller life, a life defined by what wasn't possible on the frontier. But now I see that the opposite is true. Here, we can build exactly the life we choose, without the constraints of Eastern society." "A life of our own making," Nathan agreed, drawing her closer. "Starting tonight." The promise in his voice sent a shiver of anticipation through her. Later, they would return to town, to the rooms above the mercantile that had been transformed in preparation for their first night as husband and wife. But for now, this moment of quiet connection amid their celebration seemed perfect. A pause to acknowledge the journey that had brought them together and the future stretching out before them. "I love you, Nathan Ingram," Lydia said, rising on tiptoe to brush her lips against his. "And I love you, Lydia Ingram," he replied, the words still new but feeling as natural as breathing. "More than I ever thought possible." As they held each other under the vast Montana sky, surrounded by the community that had become their extended family, both recognized the precious rarity of what they had found. A love strong enough to heal past wounds, brave enough to face frontier challenges, and deep enough to last a lifetime. For Lydia, who had once feared no man would truly see her, and for Nathan, who had believed himself undeserving of happiness, their union was more than a marriage. It was redemption, renewal, and the promise of a future brighter than either had dared to dream. And it had all begun with a meeting in a frontier mercantile, a shared appreciation for Emerson, and the whispered confession of a man who had been waiting his entire life for the woman who would finally bring him home. Spring 1880. The first rays of dawn filtered through the curtains of the east-facing bedroom, painting golden stripes across the handmade quilt. Lydia stirred, momentarily disoriented, until she felt the familiar warmth of Nathan's body curved protectively around hers, his arm draped over her expanded waistline. Their home on Willow Creek had been completed the previous summer, a sturdy two-story structure built with the help of neighbors in a series of weekend gatherings that had cemented their place in the community. Nathan had insisted on extra-large windows to capture the spectacular view of distant mountains and ensure plenty of natural light for reading. The promised library had materialized as well, lined with shelves that were gradually filling with books ordered from as far away as Boston and San Francisco. But it was this room, their bedroom, that had become Lydia's favorite space. Peaceful, private, filled with the simple luxuries of a comfortable bed, a dressing table made by Nathan's own hands, and a rocking chair positioned perfectly to catch the morning light. She shifted slightly, trying to find a more comfortable position for her 7 months pregnant body. Nathan stirred behind her, his hands splaying protectively over the swell of their child. "Morning," he murmured, his voice rough with sleep. "How are my two favorite people today?" Lydia smiled, placing her hand over his. "Your son has been practicing his boxing skills since dawn." "Or daughter," Nathan amended, a conversation they'd had many times. Unlike many frontier men who openly hoped only for sons, Nathan had consistently expressed equal joy at the prospect of a daughter. "Either way, clearly a child with your spirit." "And your stubborn persistence," she countered, wincing as a particularly strong kick landed against her ribs. Nathan chuckled, then pressed a tender kiss to her shoulder. "Would you like breakfast in bed?" "You should rest." "I'm not an invalid, Nathan," she reminded him, though she appreciated his constant attentiveness. "Besides, I promised Martha I'd help with the quilting circle this morning." "Martha would understand if you needed to rest," he pointed out, sitting up and reaching for his shirt. Dr. Mills said. "Dr. Mills said I'm healthy as a horse and should continue normal activities as long as I feel comfortable," Lydia interrupted, carefully leveraging herself to a sitting position. "And I want to finish the baby's quilt." Nathan knew better than to argue further. In the 1.5 years since their wedding, he had learned that his wife's independent spirit was one of the things he loved most about her, even when it occasioned moments of concern on his part. As they moved through their morning routine, Nathan building up the fire in the kitchen stove, while Lydia prepared a simple breakfast of oatmeal and dried apples. The easy domesticity of their shared life wrapped around them like a comfortable blanket. "Will you be late tonight?" Lydia asked as they ate, watching Nathan review notes for a case he was working on. Though still officially a deputy, he had become Sheriff Dawson's right hand and was handling increasingly complex responsibilities. "Shouldn't be," he replied. "The circuit judge arrives this afternoon for the Miller case, but preliminary hearings shouldn't run past supper time." He glanced up, his expression softening. "I'll try to escort Martha home from the quilting circle, if that eases your mind." Lydia laughed. "My mind would be more at ease if everyone stopped treating me as if I might shatter at any moment. Between you, Papa, and Martha Holloway, I'm surprised I'm allowed to pour my own tea." Nathan reached across the table to take her hand. "We fuss because we love you and because," he hesitated, a shadow crossing his features. "Because of your mother and sister," Lydia finished gently. They had discussed this before, Nathan's deep-seated fear of losing her in childbirth, as was all too common on the frontier. "Nathan, I understand your concern. But I'm strong and healthy with the best care available. This worry helps neither of us." He nodded, visibly trying to master his anxiety. "You're right, as usual, just humor us occasionally." "I humor you daily," she teased, rising to clear their plates. "Now go, or you'll be late for the judge." He stood and gathered his papers, then came around the table to draw her into his arms, careful of her swollen belly. "I love you, Lydia Ingram," he murmured against her hair. "You and our child are my whole world." "And you are ours," she replied, tilting her face up for his kiss. After Nathan departed for town, Lydia moved through her morning tasks with practiced efficiency despite her ungainly state. The home they had built together reflected both their personalities, Nathan's precision and attention to detail, her warmth and appreciation for beauty. Books shared space with practical tools. Delicate china cups that had been a wedding gift from her Boston friend Rebecca sat alongside sturdy frontier pottery. By mid-morning, Lydia was ready for the short walk to the quilting circle at Martha Holloway's home. The path between their properties had been worn smooth by frequent visits between the two women, who had developed a deep friendship in the months following Lydia's marriage. Martha, some 20 years Lydia's senior, had become both mentor and confidant, guiding the younger woman through the transition to married life and now through her first pregnancy. In return, Lydia's intellectual curiosity and fresh perspective had awakened in Martha a renewed interest in literature and education, leading to her founding Timber Creek's first lending library in a corner of the church hall. The spring day was mild, with wildflowers dotting the meadow and new leaves budding on the aspens. Lydia walked slowly, one hand supporting her back, the other carrying her contribution to the shared lunch, a basket containing freshly baked bread and a jar of preserves from last summer's berries. She was halfway to the Holloway ranch when she heard hoofbeats approaching from behind. Turning, she saw Nathan's chestnut gelding carrying not her husband but Sheriff Dawson, riding at a pace that instantly sent alarm through her. "Miss Lydia," the sheriff called, reining in beside her. In his agitation, he had reverted to her unmarried title, a habit some of the older townsfolk still hadn't broken. "You need to come to town right away." Fear clutched at her heart. "Nathan is here." "He's alive," Dawson assured her quickly, "but hurt. There was an incident at the jail, a prisoner being transferred. He had a hidden weapon." The world seemed to tilt beneath her feet. How bad? Knife wound to the shoulder. "Doc Mills is with him now at the clinic." The sheriff dismounted, his weathered face creased with concern. "Here, let me help you up. Nathan would have my hide if I let you walk all that way in your condition." With the sheriff's assistance, Lydia mounted the gelding, arranging her skirts as best she could. Fear made her movements clumsy, but the horse stood patiently, as if sensing her distress. "I'll walk alongside," Dawson said, taking the reins. "It's not far." The journey to town passed in a blur of anxiety. Lydia's mind raced with terrible possibilities, each worse than the last. A knife wound could mean anything from a minor cut to a life-threatening injury, and infections, those were often the real killers, even from seemingly modest wounds. When they reached Dr. Mills' clinic, Lydia dismounted with the sheriff's help, her legs shaking beneath her. The baby, perhaps sensing her distress, kicked vigorously, a reminder that she needed to remain calm not just for Nathan's sake but for their child's as well. The clinic waiting room was empty save for Nathan's deputy, young Thomas Fletcher, who stood as they entered. "Mrs. Ingram," he said, his expression relieved. "Thank goodness. The sheriff found you quickly." "Where is he?" Lydia demanded, dispensing with pleasantries. "How is he?" "Doctor's still with him," Thomas replied, "but he was conscious when we brought him in asking for you." Before Lydia could respond, the inner door opened, and Dr. Mills emerged, wiping his hands on a towel. The gray-haired physician had been Timber Creek's doctor for nearly 20 years, delivering most of the town's children and tending to everything from broken bones to gunshot wounds. "Lydia," he greeted her with the familiarity of her regular physician. "Come in. He's asking for you, and I'd rather he stay calm." "How bad?" she asked, following him toward the examination room. "Serious but not critical," Mills replied honestly. "The blade missed any major vessels, but it penetrated deep muscle tissue. He's lost blood and there's risk of infection, but with proper care and rest, he should recover fully." Lydia nodded, steeling herself before entering the room where Nathan lay on an examination table, his upper body bare save for the bandages wrapped around his left shoulder and chest. His face was unnaturally pale, making the dark stubble on his jaw stand out in stark contrast. "Lydia," he breathed when he saw her, attempting to sit up until Dr. Mills firmly pressed him back down. "Stay still," the doctor ordered. "Those stitches need time to set." Lydia moved swiftly to Nathan's side, taking his right hand in both of hers. "I'm here," she assured him, fighting to keep her voice steady. "I'm right here." Relief flooded his features. "I'm sorry," he said weakly. "Should have been more careful." "Hush," she scolded gently. "Save your strength." She looked to Dr. Mills. "Can I take him home?" The doctor considered. "Ordinarily, I'd keep him overnight for observation, but knowing how stubborn both of you are and given that your home is clean and well-maintained," he sighed. "Yes, provided someone stays with him at all times for the next 48 hours. He needs to remain still with the shoulder elevated. The bandages must be changed twice daily. I'll show you how. And at the first sign of fever or unusual discharge from the wound, you send for me immediately." Of course, Lydia agreed readily, relief washing over her. Having Nathan at home, where she could care for him herself, would ease her mind considerably. "What about pain management?" "I've given him laudanum for now," Mills replied. "I'll send more with you, along with a tincture of willow bark for when the worst has passed." Within the hour, arrangements had been made to transport Nathan home. Sheriff Dawson provided his personal wagon, lined with blankets and hay to cushion the journey over the rutted roads. Harold Harrington, summoned from the mercantile, rode ahead to prepare the house, while Martha Holloway, alerted to the situation, promised to bring supper and stay the night if needed. As the wagon rolled slowly toward their home, Lydia sat beside Nathan, supporting his head in her lap despite his weak protests that she shouldn't be exerting herself in her condition. "We take care of each other," she reminded him firmly. "That was in our vows, if you recall." A ghost of a smile touched his lips, so it was. By the time they reached the house, Nathan was drifting in and out of consciousness, the laudanum and blood loss taking their toll. With Harold and the sheriff's help, they managed to get him upstairs and settled in bed, propped up on pillows as Dr. Mills had instructed. Once Nathan was asleep, Lydia allowed herself a moment of vulnerability, sinking into the rocking chair beside their bed and pressing her hands to her face. "He'll be all right, Lydia," her father assured her, his hand gentle on her shoulder. "He's strong and healthy, and he has the best nurse in the territory." She nodded, gathering her composure. "I know. It's just that you love him and seeing him hurt is almost unbearable," Harold finished. "I remember feeling the same when your mother was ill." The comparison startled her. In her fear for Nathan, she hadn't considered the parallels her father might be drawing to his own loss. "Papa, I'm sorry. This must be bringing back painful memories." Harold shook his head, different circumstances entirely. "Your mother's illness was long and slow. This," he gestured to Nathan's sleeping form, "this is an injury from which a strong young man will recover." He squeezed her shoulder reassuringly. "But it is a reminder, isn't it, of how precious our loved ones are?" "Yes," Lydia agreed softly, "every day." In the days that followed, Lydia rarely left Nathan's side, sleeping in the rocking chair when he insisted she not risk jostling his injury by sharing the bed. Martha Holloway and other women from town brought meals and offered assistance, while Sheriff Dawson visited daily with updates about the prisoner who had attacked Nathan, now facing additional charges and transferred to the more secure jail in the county seat. Nathan proved to be both a terrible patient, restless and frustrated by his enforced inactivity, and a touching one, his concern for Lydia's well-being overshadowing his own discomfort. "You're nearly 7.5 months along," he protested on the third day, watching her change his bandages with careful precision. "You should be resting, not nursing me." "I am resting," she countered. "I sit beside you most of the day, reading or sewing. Martha brings meals. Papa handles the mercantile. I'm hardly exerting myself." Nathan captured her hand as she finished securing the fresh bandage. "You're extraordinary, you know that." She smiled, bending awkwardly around her pregnant belly to kiss his forehead. "So you keep telling me." "Because it's true," his expression grew serious. "When that blade went in, Lydia, my first thought wasn't for myself. It was for you and the baby. What would happen if I wasn't here to protect you both?" "Nathan, let me finish," he insisted. "I realized in that moment that I've never properly provided for that possibility. We need to discuss arrangements, legal matters, to ensure you and our child are secure if anything happens to me." Lydia wanted to protest, to insist that nothing would happen, but her practical nature recognized the wisdom in his concern. The frontier was dangerous, his profession doubly so. Proper planning wasn't morbid, it was responsible. "All right," she agreed. "When you're stronger, we'll speak with Judge Wilson about the necessary documents. But Nathan, you're going to recover fully from this. Dr. Mills is very pleased with your progress." "I know," he managed a smile, though pain still shadowed his eyes. "And I intend to be right beside you when our child arrives. I just need to know you'd be all right if the worst ever happened." "I understand," she said softly, "but I expect you to hold up your end of our bargain, Deputy Ingram. You promised me a lifetime, and I intend to collect in full." His smile strengthened. "Yes, ma'am." By the end of the second week, Nathan was strong enough to move downstairs to the library for part of each day, reclining on the comfortable sofa while Lydia read aloud or worked on the nearly completed baby quilt. His color had returned, and though the wound was still painful, infection had been avoided, and his recovery was progressing well. It was during one of these quiet afternoons that Lydia felt the first unusual tightening across her abdomen, different from the practiced contractions she had experienced occasionally over the past weeks. She paused in her reading, placing a hand on her belly. Nathan, ever attuned to her, noticed immediately. "Lydia, what is it?" "Nothing to worry about," she assured him, "just Braxton Hicks contractions. Dr. Mills mentioned they might increase as the time approaches." But as the afternoon wore on, the tightenings became more regular and more intense. By evening, Lydia could no longer deny what was happening. "Nathan," she said calmly as they finished the simple supper Martha had brought earlier, "I think you should send Thomas for Dr. Mills." His head snapped up, eyes widening as he registered her meaning. "The baby." "But it's too early, you're not due for another 5 or 6 weeks." Apparently your child is impatient, she replied, trying to keep her tone light despite her own concern. My water hasn't broken yet, but the contractions are regular, about 15 minutes apart now. Nathan was on his feet instantly, his injured arm momentarily forgotten as he moved to her side. I'll saddle Juniper myself. You will do no such thing, Lydia interrupted firmly. Your shoulder is barely healing. Thomas is waiting on the porch. Martha asked him to stay close just in case. Send him for the doctor and help me upstairs. For once, Nathan didn't argue, recognizing the wisdom in her plan. He called for the young deputy, gave him urgent instructions, then turned his full attention to Lydia. The next hours passed in a blur of increasing pain and focused determination. Dr. Mills arrived promptly, confirmed that labor had indeed begun, and settled in for what he warned might be a long night. First babies often take their time, he explained, examining Lydia with professional detachment. But everything looks normal so far. The baby is positioned correctly, and your body is responding as it should. Nathan refused to leave her side, despite the doctor's suggestion that many frontier husbands preferred to wait elsewhere during delivery. When Martha arrived to assist, she simply nodded in understanding at the scene, Nathan seated beside the bed, his good arm supporting Lydia through each contraction, his voice a steady anchor of encouragement. He's different from most men that way, Martha commented to Dr. Mills during a brief respite between contractions. Not squeamish about birth or believing it's only women's business. My sister, Nathan explained, overhearing the remark. I helped deliver both her children when the midwife couldn't arrive in time. A shadow crossed his face at the memory of his lost family, but he quickly refocused on Lydia as another contraction began. The labor progressed steadily through the night. By dawn, Lydia was fully dilated, her strength waning but her determination undiminished. Nathan's shoulder must have been aching fiercely from the awkward position of supporting her, but he never complained, never wavered. You're the strongest person I've ever known, he told her during a brief respite, brushing sweat-dampened hair from her forehead. You can do this, Lydia. Our child is nearly here. When the final stage arrived, Lydia drew on reserves of strength she hadn't known she possessed. With Nathan's encouragement, Martha's practical assistance, and Dr. Mills' experienced guidance, she pushed their child into the world just as the first rays of sunlight streamed through the bedroom window. A girl, Dr. Mills announced, his professional demeanor softening as he lifted the squalling infant. A healthy girl, despite her early arrival. Tears streamed down Lydia's face as the tiny, red-faced bundle was placed on her chest. Nathan leaned close, his expression one of wonder and profound love as he gently touched their daughter's head with trembling fingers. She's perfect, he whispered, voice thick with emotion. Lydia, she's absolutely perfect. After the afterbirth was delivered and both mother and child were cleaned and settled, Dr. Mills examined the baby thoroughly. She's small, he confirmed, but her lungs are clearly strong and she has good color. With careful attention, she should thrive. Martha, who had discreetly handled the messy aftermath of birth, smiled at the new family from the doorway. I'll let Harold know he has a granddaughter, she said. And I'll bring breakfast for the proud parents. Once they were alone with their daughter, Nathan carefully settled on the edge of the bed, mindful of his injured shoulder but unwilling to be even slightly separated from his wife and child. What shall we call her? He asked, gently stroking the baby's cheek with one finger. Lydia looked down at their daughter, taking in the tiny features that somehow combined elements of both herself and Nathan. I was thinking, Eleanor. After your mother. Nathan's breath caught, you would do that. Of course, Lydia said softly, she should know her heritage, the strong women who came before her. She hesitated, then added, Eleanor Martha, if you agree. Martha has been such a support to us both. Eleanor Martha Ingram, Nathan repeated, testing the name. It's beautiful, perfect for her. His voice roughened with emotion. Thank you, Lydia, for everything, our home, our daughter, our life together. Our shared creation, she replied, leaning into his side as they both gazed at their newborn daughter. Everything we've built together. In that peaceful morning light, with their unexpected but deeply welcomed daughter sleeping in Lydia's arms and Nathan's protective presence beside them, the circle of their family felt complete. The journey that had brought them together, from Nathan's flight from his past to Lydia's cautious guarding of her heart, had led to this moment of profound belonging. Eleanor's early arrival, coinciding with Nathan's recovery, seemed to underscore a truth they had both come to understand. Life on the frontier was unpredictable, sometimes dangerous, often challenging, but infinitely rewarding when shared with the right person. "I love you," Nathan murmured, pressing a gentle kiss to Lydia's temple. "Both of you more than I ever thought possible." "And we love you," Lydia replied, her heart so full it seemed impossible to contain. "Our protector, our partner, our home." Outside their window, Timber Creek was awakening to a new day, wagons rolling toward town, ranch hands beginning their morning chores, the community continuing its rhythms of frontier life. But inside the bedroom of the house by Willow Creek, time seemed suspended in a perfect moment of completion as Nathan and Lydia Ingram welcomed their daughter and the future they would build together. Timber Creek, Montana Territory. Summer 1885. The late afternoon sun cast long shadows across the lawn behind the Ingram home, where tables had been arranged in a horseshoe formation and decorated with wildflowers in mason jars. Children darted between adults, their laughter carrying on the warm summer breeze, while a small group of musicians tuned their instruments near the newly constructed gazebo. Lydia stood on the back porch, surveying the gathering with quiet satisfaction. What had begun 5 years ago as a small celebration of Alina's first birthday had evolved into an annual tradition embraced by the entire community. A summer festival marking not just her daughter's birth, but also the anniversary of the capture of the Blackfoot River Gang, an event now woven into local lore. "Everything looks wonderful," Martha Holloway said, joining Lydia on the porch. At 62, Martha's hair had silvered completely, but her energy remained undiminished as she helped coordinate the celebration. "The children are beside themselves with excitement about the cake." Lydia smiled, her gaze finding 5-year-old Alina in the crowd, her honey-blonde braids bouncing as she led a group of children in an impromptu game of tag. Beside her trotted her constant shadow, her 3-year-old brother James, named for Nathan's father, trying valiantly to keep up with his sister and her friends. "I can hardly believe she's 5 already," Lydia said. "It seems only yesterday she was that tiny, early baby we feared might not thrive. And now she's the strongest, smartest child in Timber Creek," Martha said proudly, with a grandmother's prerogative, though the relationship was one of choice rather than blood. "Takes after her mother that way." Lydia laughed, and her father's stubbornness, unfortunately. As if summoned by the mention, Nathan appeared from the direction of the barn, carrying 2-month-old Rebecca in one arm while his free hand guided 7-year-old Peter Fletcher, Thomas's son, who was proudly transporting a wooden toy horse, clearly a new creation from Nathan's workshop. The years had added a few silver strands at Nathan's temples and fine lines around his eyes, but to Lydia, he was more handsome than ever. The deputy's badge still gleamed on his chest, though he now shared sheriffing duties with Dawson as the aging lawman prepared for eventual retirement. The knife wound from years ago had healed completely, leaving only a scar that occasionally ached in cold weather. "Your husband has been showing the boys his workshop again," Martha observed with amusement. "Bernard says he's never seen someone so skilled with both a gun and a lathe." "He finds peace in making things," Lydia explained, watching as Nathan carefully transferred baby Rebecca to Peter's mother before rejoining the children's game, much to their delight. "Says it balances the occasional ugliness of law enforcement." The woodworking had begun as therapy during Nathan's recovery from the knife wound and had evolved into a serious craft. The Ingram home was filled with his creations, bookcases, rocking chairs, toys for the children, and he had recently begun selling pieces through the mercantile, which Lydia now managed while her father enjoyed a semi-retirement. As Nathan played with the children, his laugh carrying across the lawn, Lydia reflected on the journey that had brought them to this moment of contentment. 7 years of marriage had deepened their connection in ways she could never have anticipated when she first met the mysterious cowboy in her father's store. There had been challenges, of course, Nathan's occasional nightmares about his ranger days, the difficult birth of James, which had left Lydia weakened for months afterward, the fire that had nearly destroyed the mercantile 3 winters ago. The economic downturn that had strained many local businesses, but through it all, their partnership had remained unshakable. Nathan's quiet strength and unfailing support had proven the perfect complement to Lydia's intelligence and practical nature. Together they had built not just a family but a true home, a haven in the sometimes harsh reality of frontier life. "There you are." Harold Harrington's voice broke into Lydia's reflections as her father joined them on the porch, moving more slowly now at 71, but still sharp-minded and engaged in community affairs. The Mayers arrived with that newspaper fellow from Helena. They're asking for you both. Lydia sighed. I suppose we can't avoid the annual retelling of the Timber Creek Showdown, as they insist on calling it. Martha patted her arms sympathetically. Local legends are important, dear. They bind communities together. I know, Lydia conceded, but they've embellished the story so much over the years, I scarcely recognize the events anymore. Last year's article claimed Nathan single-handedly defeated 12 outlaws, while I delivered a leaner during a thunderstorm. Harold chuckled. The truth rarely makes as good a story as fiction, I'm afraid. But Timber Creek has flourished since those days, partly because of that reputation for standing against lawlessness. The railroad spur, the new school, even the recent talk of a proper courthouse, all stemmed from the town's growing prominence after Reed's capture. Your father's right, Martha agreed. Besides, your children love hearing the story, even the exaggerated version. As if to prove her point, Eliner's voice rose above the general chatter. Papa, tell us about the outlaws again. Please. Nathan looked to Lydia, his expression both amused and resigned. At her nod, he gathered the children around him on the grass, including not just his own but a dozen others from town. Parents drifted closer as well, many having heard the tale countless times but enjoying it nonetheless. Lydia moved from the porch to stand at the edge of the gathering, watching as Nathan began the now familiar narrative, careful to keep the most frightening elements muted for younger ears while maintaining enough excitement to captivate his audience. It was the spring of 1878, he started, his deep voice carrying easily across the lawn. Timber Creek was a smaller place then, with no railroad, no proper school building. As he spoke, Lydia felt a familiar warmth spread through her chest. This was her husband, not the mythic hero of newspaper accounts, but a real man who had faced his past with courage, who had chosen love over continued flight, who had built a life of purpose and meaning in a community he had come to cherish. When Nathan reached the part about their first meeting at the Mercantile, his eyes found hers across the gathering, a private smile passing between them. That moment, when a former Texas Ranger posing as a ranch hand had asked for a copy of Emerson's essays, had altered the course of both their lives in ways neither could have imagined. Eliner, who knew her role in the annual retelling, piped up on cue, and then the baby came early while Papa was still hurt from fighting the bad men. That's right, Nathan confirmed, his expression softening as it always did when he spoke of his children's births. Your mama was the bravest person I've ever known, bringing you into the world while I was barely able to help her. Is that when you whispered, I've been waiting for you? Asked 8-year-old Sarah Peterson, the minister's granddaughter. Nathan looked momentarily confused. This particular embellishment wasn't part of his usual telling. I don't recall. That's what Mrs. Wilson said, Sarah insisted. She said when Deputy Ingram first saw Miss Lydia, he whispered, I've been waiting for you, and they both knew right away they were meant to be together. Laughter rippled through the adult audience, while Lydia felt a blush rise in her cheeks. Harriet Wilson's romantic imagination and love of gossip clearly remained undimmed by the years. Well now, Nathan said, recovering smoothly, I might not have said those exact words right then. But they would have been true. His gaze found Lydia's again, warm and sincere. I had been waiting even if I didn't know it. Papa's being romantic again, Eliner announced to general amusement. Mama says that's why we have 3 children now. This prompted more laughter and a deeper blush from Lydia, who stepped forward to rescue her husband from further awkward questions from perceptive children. I think it's time for cake, she announced, instantly diverting the children's attention. And after that, the musicians are ready to play for dancing. As the gathering reorganized itself around the refreshment tables, Nathan made his way to Lydia's side, slipping an arm around her waist and drawing her close. I should thank Harriet Wilson, he murmured against her ear. That's actually a rather nice addition to our story. Don't encourage her, Lydia replied, though she couldn't help smiling. Next year she'll have you reciting poetry while fending off an entire gang with one hand. I would have if I'd known any poetry worth reciting, he teased. Then more seriously, it's a good life we've built here, isn't it? Lydia followed his gaze across their expanded property, the main house with its wide porch and many windows, the workshop where Nathan created his wooden treasures, the flower and vegetable gardens she tended with the children's help, the small orchard of apple trees just beginning to mature. Beyond their immediate homestead lay Timber Creek itself, visibly changed from the struggling outpost it had been when they first met. The railroad had brought growth and prosperity, nearly doubling the town's population. The one-room schoolhouse had been replaced by a proper school building where Lydia taught literature 2 days a week. The church had a real steeple now, and a lending library occupied its own small building on Main Street. A very good life, she agreed, leaning into his embrace. Better than I ever imagined possible when I was that cynical young woman convinced love had no place on the frontier. And better than I deserved when I was that broken former ranger, running from my past and afraid to build a future, Nathan added. Their moment of reflection was interrupted by James, who came barreling into their legs at full speed. "Mama, Papa, cake time," he announced, tugging at their hands with the determination of a 3-year-old focused on sweets. Nathan scooped him up with practiced ease. "Can't keep a growing boy from his cake, can we?" As they rejoined the celebration, moving among friends and neighbors who had become an extended family over the years, Lydia felt a profound sense of gratitude wash over her. The frontier that had once seemed a place of limitation had instead become a canvas on which she and Nathan had painted a life richer and more fulfilling than either could have created alone. Later, as twilight softened the landscape and lanterns were lit around the yard, the musicians struck up a waltz. Nathan appeared at Lydia's side, where she sat with baby Rebecca sleeping against her shoulder. "May I have this dance, Mrs. Ingram?" he asked, extending his hand with formal gallantry that made her smile. "Rebecca is perfectly safe with her grandfather," Nathan assured her as Harold approached, arms already outstretched to take his youngest grandchild. "Go on," her father encouraged. "The little one and I will be fine." With Rebecca transferred to Harold's experienced hands, Lydia allowed Nathan to lead her to the space cleared for dancing. Other couples had already taken to the floor, Martha and Bernard Holloway moving with the coordinated grace of decades together. Young Thomas Fletcher and his wife Sarah executing a more energetic interpretation of the waltz, even Sheriff Dawson escorting the widowed Mrs. Peterson in a sedate circuit of the dance area. "Do you remember the first time we danced?" Nathan asked as he drew Lydia into his arms, his hand warm and steady at her waist. "At our wedding," she replied, following his lead as they joined the other dancers. He shook his head slightly. "No, before that, at the Founders' Day celebration 2 weeks after Reed was captured. You wore a green dress that matched your eyes, and you were still pale from your ordeal." Lydia's eyes widened in surprise. "I'd forgotten. You asked me to dance, and everyone watched because it was the first public acknowledgement of your courtship intentions." "I was terrified," Nathan admitted with a soft laugh. "Not of the outlaws we'd just defeated, but of stepping on your toes or making a fool of myself in front of the entire town." "You were perfect," she assured him, remembering now the nervous young deputy who had so carefully observed all the proper formalities while his eyes betrayed deeper emotions. "As I recall, you even quoted Emerson as you escorted me back to my father. What lies behind us and what lies before us are tiny matters compared to what lies within us," Nathan recited, the words coming easily even years later. It seemed appropriate at the time. We had survived danger together, but the future, our future, was still unwritten. "And now?" Lydia asked, knowing the answer but wanting to hear it in his voice. Nathan's arms tightened around her as they continued their circuit of the makeshift dance floor. In the lantern light, his face was both familiar and new, the beloved features that had been part of her daily life for 7 years still capable of stirring her heart. "Now, Lydia Ingram, I can say with absolute certainty that Harriet Wilson was right after all," he said, his voice low and meant only for her. "I had been waiting for you. Every moment of my life before we met was leading me to you, to our children, to this home we've built together." "Even the difficult parts?" she asked, "the loss, the pain, the years of running." "Especially those," he confirmed. "Without them, I might never have come to Timber Creek, never walked into your father's mercantile, never discovered that love could exist even in the harshest places." The music swelled around them, but for Lydia, the world had narrowed to just this. Her husband's arms, his heartbeat steady beneath her palm, the love in his eyes that had never dimmed from the first moment he had looked at her with something more than casual interest. "I love you, Nathan Ingram," she said simply. "And I love you, Lydia Ingram," he replied, bending to brush his lips against hers in a brief but tender kiss. "Today, tomorrow, and for all the days we have left." Around them, Timber Creek continued its evolution from frontier outpost to established community. Their children grew, their family expanded, their roots deepened in the Montana soil. The West itself was changing, civilization pushing ever further into once wild places, bringing both progress and new challenges. But in the heart of it all, in the home they had built beside Willow Creek, Lydia and Nathan had created something timeless. A love strong enough to withstand the hardships of frontier life, deep enough to heal past wounds, and true enough to serve as a foundation for generations to come. For Lydia, who had once feared that no man would truly see and love her complex self, and for Nathan, who had whispered, "I've been waiting for you," in his heart long before the words found voice, their journey together had proven that the frontier's greatest gift wasn't gold or land or opportunity. It was the freedom to become their truest selves, and the joy of being fully known and completely loved in the midst of life's wild, unpredictable beauty.